Thank you all for being here. It's been a really wonderful conference. My name is Rana Kaufman, and I'm an associate professor of English and affiliate faculty with the Holocaust and Genocide Studies program at PLU. Beth has given me fresh orders, which is to tell you that we're going to make a slight change in the program. We will hear from the Brills, and then we will move right into the next session and ask Steve Brill to join us, and we'll hear from him, and then we'll have a question and answer period for all three. So we're going to do a little bit of merging. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to our next speakers, Janet and Sam Brill, who will be telling us about Kaytek, a little girl from the Warsaw Ghetto who became a Polish resistance fighter and decorated war hero. Dr. Janet von Brill is a nationally recognized nutrition, health, and fitness expert specializing in cardiovascular disease prevention. She has authored 3 books on the topic: Blood Pressure Down, Prevent a Second Heart Attack, and Cholesterol Down. Dr. Brill is one of the few worldwide experts on the Mediterranean diet, having published extensively on the topic in both the scientific and lay press. Dr. Brill is dedicated to her field and to the broader goal of educating the public on heart health. She volunteers much of her time, expertise, and funds in support of the American Heart Association. Samuel Brill began his career in real estate at an early age, learning how to build homes from his father. In 1984, Sam and his newlywed wife moved to Coral Springs, Florida, where he began his own construction firm called Classic Homes of South Florida Incorporated. As the son of Holocaust survivors, Sam Brill has spent much of his time and energy speaking about his parents' experience, as well as supporting such global Jewish organizations as AJWS, United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, Yad Vashem, Jewish Foundation, and the Ghetto Fighters Kibbutz. Please join me in welcoming Janet and Sam Brill.
Good afternoon. Today I'm going to tell the story of my dear mother-in-law. I'm going to tell it because my husband is grieving of the recent loss of his mother. And I wanted to start out by reading a quote that I think kind of sums it up. As survivors become endangered and their flames extinguish, they rely on the next generation to not only light new candles, but to bear witness, both for the dead and the living. It is up to us now to keep their stories alive. So this afternoon, I intend to keep my mother-in-law, Edna's story alive. Okay, so I did a lot of research after my mother-in-law passed away, and I have a lot of quotes that I'm going to use directly from her when she did the Shoah tape for Spielberg. I also translated her brother's, Yaakov's, testimonial that is at the Ghetto Fighters' House from Hebrew, and I'm going to read some excerpts from that as well. Edna was born in Warsaw, Poland, the capital of Poland. She actually was born at number 18 Mila Street, which I will tell you about. It's quite historic. On October 2nd, 1934. I think that I'm trying to understand, which of course this is incomprehensible, but Warsaw was called Paris of the North. It was magnificent in terms of culture and architecture and beauty. I'm from New York City, so I try and understand what was going on. And in 1934, there were 1.2 million people, about 400,000 Jews lived in Warsaw, second only to New York City in terms of Jewish population. So the Jews were the largest minority in Poland, but really the Jewish people were Warsaw, and Warsaw, that was part of the history. Next slide, please. Edna was born on Mila Street, and you can see that that is in the northern quadrant of Warsaw, which was inhabited mainly by Jews, although Jews lived throughout Warsaw at the time. According to Yakov, Edna's brother's testimony, Mila Street was 99% Jewish, and it was described as one of the liveliest streets of pre-war Warsaw. Number 18 was most likely a very elegant apartment building. The Shureks, Edna's maiden name, must have been quite well off because they owned a flat on the first floor, and Edna's grandparents on her mother's side owned the basement where they kept tables and chairs and things, and they rented it out for bar mitzvahs and weddings and things of that nature. Next slide. So you can advance. So I think a lot of people get confused when you say the Warsaw uprising. There were two, and I wanted just to clarify that. There was the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, which were the Jews that fought against the final liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto, and that was in 1943. So that was an act of Jewish resistance, as opposed to the Warsaw uprising, which were the Polish people and the Polish Home Army, and they rose up a year later in 1944 against the Nazis. Next. I'm trying to, this is a picture of a family in about 1934, the Rybeck family, and I'm trying to give you an idea of what it was like in Warsaw, the most beautiful, magnificent city in the world, one of them. And here's a family, a typical family that was in the park, sitting there, having their portrait taken. My Edna's parents' family, there were a family of 10 in 1939. There were her parents, Shulamit and Avraham. She had an older brother, Shlomo. I'm figuring was about 17 in 1939. Her older sister, Hannah, was about 15. She had a brother, Mordecai, 13, and then there was Yaakov, 11, Miriam, 9, and then Edna was 4 years old in 1939 in September. And there were also twin infant boys in the family, and Edna tells in her show a tape that she remembers the bris. But she also said that, this is quote from her talk, there were twin infant boys born in 1939 before the war. I remember the bris. My parents ended up giving them away to another family. None of us know what happened to them, if they survived or didn't, but being circumcised boys, I doubt it very much. Next slide. September 1st, 1939, Germany attacks Poland and World War II begins. September 1939 is called the Siege of Warsaw, the Blitzkrieg. There was heavy bombing, and about 10% of Warsaw was destroyed. Edna was 4 years old, and she was at a birthday party with her older sister Miriam, and she says she recalls that they were at a birthday party and the bombing began, and they went running in the streets, and she couldn't see because all the debris from the bomb, from the houses that were bombed, and dust and all went into her eyes. So she and Miriam were lost, and Miriam took her to some kind of medical facility, and they helped her with her eyesight, but that's actually what she experienced. So, next slide, please. Then, so that was September 1939. On April 1st, 1940, Edna's living in the Warsaw Ghetto on Mila Street, and they began constructing, the Germans, the ghetto wall. She is now 5 years old. Next slide. A few months later, by November 15th, 1940, Edna has turned 6, and that's when the Germans sealed the ghetto to the outside world. Next slide. So at this point in 1941, Edna is 6 years old. There's almost 500,000 Jews that are brought in from other areas in Poland and Germany and placed in the ghetto. So at this point, almost 500,000 Jews. There's about 7 to 10 people living in each home. Next. Oh, okay. So how did they survive? The Germans rationed the Jews, and they allowed them 184 calories per day, which you can't sustain life on that. So how did they survive? They survived by children, or what are called smugglers, and Edna and her sister Miriam and Yaakov were still children, and they actually went through the holes at the bottom of the wall and went to the other side and to the Aryan side, and were able to buy food because the mom, Shulamit, still has a little bit of money, so she would give it to them, and they would buy the food and then put it in their pockets and then sneak back across the other side. I wanted to read something about survival and how Yaakov said that he had the strength to survive. He writes, or he said, "I became friends with a German guy who worked at the airport. He was a false German from a Polish-German descent. And he told me that soon I won't be able to go in and smuggle food to the ghetto and earn money, as I used to. He said that soon it will be all over. They will all take the Jews away from there to the concentration camps, extermination camps, and no one will be able to get close to the ghetto. No one will be able to get back from there. They will exterminate us all." So I went to my friend's house in the ghetto, and I told them what the German told me. Their father started screaming at me, "Shegitz," Yiddish for hoodlum. "Do you want to cause panic all around?" He wanted to kick me out of the house, but there was a Jewish doctor in there, and he said, "This boy will stay alive because he knows what our fate is and what is waiting for us. He acknowledges the truth and he will survive." And those words that he said, that I will stay alive, made me stronger and helped me to never give up. So yesterday we heard about the youth, and there's something about the youth and their ability to fight and to survive that helped them. And so Yaakov went on to discuss with Edna and Miriam how to survive. So basically what happened was Edna and Miriam snuck out of the ghetto, and they sang, they were very good performers because there was a very musical household that they grew up in. And so they snuck out of the ghetto, and they would sing Polish songs, sing and dance in restaurants, and in exchange for food or money, which they would bring back to their mother before the curfew. But eventually the conditions became so bad in the ghetto that the mother said, "No, you are not to stay here any longer." So then Miriam, who was 5 years older, had a friend that was not Jewish, and she had friends that the daughters had died, and their names were Stefcia and Skolkowska. So they took those names, and those became their aliases. And then they decided to remain on the Aryan side and to support themselves by singing and dancing. In 1941, is when people were really began to starve. They were murdered because they starved. They starved to death, and they died either of starvation or typhus or the cold. Okay, can you advance? The parents, Abraham and Shlomo, were shipped to Majdanek. Edna said in her testimonial that Abraham was a Zionist, and so the Jewish council came to the door and said, come to, you'll work in a labor camp, you'll save your family. So he took his oldest son, Shlomo. Abraham actually helped build Majdanek, and he was cremated there, and Shlomo, the oldest son, actually put his father in the crematorium. Shlomo actually survived and went to many other concentration camps because he was a very good worker, and he ended up surviving the war, moving to Israel, but did not handle the ramifications of his experience well, and he became an alcoholic, and he died at a young age. Hannah and Mordecai were the next to be taken from Mila 18, and they were shipped to Treblinka. The twins, as I said before, were given away. And Shulamit died of starvation or typhus, not quite sure which, on Warsaw Ghetto street. How do we know this? Because Yaakov went back into the ghetto and saw his mother on the street. So how do you survive on the Aryan side? Yaakov was very attached to his two sisters, so I'm going to read his testament from his testimonial. I was very attached to my two sisters. The gypsies took them and they stayed with them for a while. The gypsies used them. They sent them to sing and dance in coffee shops. They danced and made some money for those gypsies. And in that way, slowly, they managed to get by. They knew more and more families who later agreed to take them in and take care of them. I stayed away from them for their safety as I was a boy, and it's not a hard task to know if a boy is Jewish or not. You just take off your pants. No need for any extra questions. By going with them, I would have put them in danger, so I stayed away and only gave them one piece of advice. I told them that no one can say that they are Jewish, that no matter what, they should not tell anyone that they are Jewish, even if they have to undergo torture or get beaten to death. Even if they might die, they should never say, they can never admit that they're Jewish. And that helped them survive. When Miriam was taken to the Gestapo and went through interrogations, she stood her ground and said that she's not Jewish, and she succeeded. She even received official documents declaring that she's not Jewish. Next. Actually, Edna appears, there's a documentary that is fairly recent called Little Heroes from the Warsaw Ghetto, and Edna's in there as Stefcia. She's also in this book, The Cigarette Seller. She didn't sell cigarettes, but she did sing and dance. That's how she was able to survive and get money. And there's a quote in there. It says, 2 sisters, age 14 and 9, stood under a wall singing Polish songs. Okay, so how did they survive? They became very strict Catholics, and they would take shelter quite often in the churches. And when Sam and I and the kids went back to Warsaw with Edna many, many years ago, she took us into the church where she would stay. Churches were open 24 hours. And she said that she would look up and see the portrait of Jesus Christ and his heart beating, and she would see that, and she would dream about that, and she would dream about Jesus Christ opening his arms and taking her in. Yakov, in his testimonial, wrote, for example, a woman helped me. She invited me over, gave me some good food and clothes, but she was anti-Semitic. She thought I was a good conservative Christian boy who goes to church and prays the prayers. She spoke about Jews, saying she would have slaughtered any Jew if she could. And she helped me, a nice Christian boy, to bring food and clothes to his Christian family. To her kind, she was humane and thoughtful, but to Jews, she was ready to slaughter each and every one of us. All right, so back then in the summer of 1942 was the great liquidation action, the Großaktion, and that's a photo of the Jews assembling at Umschlagplatz. So that is when that summer that a few 100,000 Jews were sent to Treblinka. So during this, then in 1944 or 1942, Edna or Stefcia was now a Polish Christian, and she was on the Aryan side, and she was very patriotic, and she's 8 years old, and she joins the Polish Home Army. They assigned her a nom de guerre, or a code name, and her name was Kaytek. Kaytek was from the book Kaytek the Wizard, written by Janusz Korczak, whose pen name was Henrik Goldschmidt. He was a pediatrician. You may have heard of him. He ran the orphanage in the Warsaw Ghetto, and so he wrote Kaytek the Wizard, which was basically the Harry Potter of its time, and it was one of the most popular children's books in 1933, and it's about a little boy who gains magical powers and uses them eventually, learns how to use them for good, for the good of mankind. Anyway, so her name was Kaytek. And on the left is a picture of Janusz Korczak. He was actually given a reprieve by the Nazis. They were going to let him live, and he refused. And he dressed up his children in the orphanage and went telling them they're going to go to the countryside. And he took them to Umschlagplatz, and they were killed at Treblinka. Next. So in 1943, in January, the Jewish resistance in the ghetto said, no more, they're coming back to take the rest and liquidate the rest of the Jews. So there was the beginning of the Jewish resistance. So on Passover, April 19th, they started the fighting, and Edna was on the Aryan side, and she saw what was going on, and I'll read you what she said. During the ghetto uprising, we were staying in a flat overlooking the ghetto, and I can't even explain the horrors we saw. And the Christians we were staying with didn't care. Looking at the massacre of children, infants, just horrific. My sister and I would look over in the middle of the night at the fires and say, maybe we should give ourselves up. But we didn't. It's amazing, the survival instinct. So you can understand, here's a picture of Mila Street, which is where she was born. And this is what, and if you look, you could see that she and Miriam would have been staying in a flat on the other side of the wall, and they can see what was going on, especially at night, in the ghetto during the uprising. So these are the scenes that she witnessed with her own eyes. And here's another, they burnt it down. So this was also Mila Street. So the significance of where she was born is that the Jewish combat organization led by 24-year-old Mordecai Anelewitz was the leader of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. And underneath Mila 18, where Edna was born, was the largest bunker that was excavated. So during the Jewish ghetto uprising, towards the end, on May 8th of the uprising, the Ukrainian and Latvian SS actually bombarded the entrance to Mila 18 and tear gassed it, and there were about 200 or so Jews in Mila 18, and they all, most of them took poison rather than be killed by the Nazis. So there's a memorial stone there with the names of the leaders. And there's a picture of Mordecai, and his girlfriend was with him. So on the memorial stone that's there right now is the names of the leaders of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. And it's actually, they used the stones from the remnants of the homes on Mila Street to build the memorial. Okay, so here we have Etna in 1944. This is a photograph of young Polish resistance fighters. And Edna was now 9 years old, and she fought with her firearm in the Warsaw uprising, and she was actually a courier. She couldn't read or write, but she was so smart that she was able to not only outwit the Nazis, but also the Polish people in terms of because of her ability to pull the wool over their eyes and not be detected as being Jewish. So she was a courier. She was the youngest resistance fighter. She was a runner. She would run the messages over back and forth. She got well, I'll read what Yakov wrote about Stefcia. My little sister was a courier during the war. She didn't know how to read or write. She was just a little girl. They gave her letters to pass on from bunker to bunker, so she used to put the letters between different fingers so she could remember which letter she should give to whom. My little sister was the last one that returned her firearm at a census of the Polish resistance in 1944. And then I'll read quickly what she had to say. Edna writes, soon we were recruited to join the Polish resistance. I was 9 and Miriam was 14. My sister worked in transportation, but I was extremely small for my age, undernourished, of course. They gave you code names during the war, not your real name. Mine was Kaytek. It means a small, bright child with special powers. I was 9 years old. My job I was assigned to is to be a runner, a courier, from the command headquarters to other headquarters because I knew the streets of Warsaw so well. I looked ridiculous in my uniform as a soldier, except for the beret. I rolled up the sleeves of the arms and legs because no uniform fit me. I was told my job was extremely important, so I was sold. I was extremely committed, patriotic to defend my country. I couldn't read or write, but I had a photographic memory. The general secretary would give me envelopes with just a number on them, not the address. I would memorize the address because it was coded. They thought I could read and write, so I lied. I said the instructions of the writing were terrible. Please read it off to me. I would ask them to repeat it, and then I would put the envelope, number 1 between the first 2 fingers, number 2 between the second 2 fingers, etc., so I never mixed them up. I would get like 10 orders. Only a small child could squeeze through the small bunkers. I was the youngest soldier of the Warsaw uprising fighters. After the war, the Polish army women were sent to camps, and first in August 1st, 1944, there was 5,000 women. Then they went to transit camps. So she first went to Stalag XI-B, Sandbostel, and then to Oberlangen here. And out of the 5,000 women fighters, 3,000 were POWs, and 1,721 ended up at Oberlangen. So the conditions were horrific. But I put this slide up. This is a little boy. He was Polish Catholic, and he has the Medal of Honor. And you can see that's Edna, that she has the same Medal of Honor. So she was actually awarded 2 medals, one for bravery and one because she was injured with a grenade, and she still had shrapnel throughout her life in her skin. Okay, so eventually after she was liberated, she was sent to actually Germany for a year, where she attended her first school, and then she went with the Polish army fighters to a refugee camp in Porto San Giorgio, Italy, where she was given a meeting with the Pope, and he actually awarded her, Pope Pius XII, a papal award. So I'll read you very quickly, because I'm running out of time. There were now about 150 Polish fighter women left in our group. We were given the choice to go in trucks to Porto San Giorgio, Italy, for 4 months. At this point, I had reached maybe 4th or 5th grade. In Italy, I got an audience with the Pope. We were a group of 15 women. I, being the youngest, I was a big deal. The Pope gave me a tiny little medal, and I carry this with me always. I was a bad girl, though. I chiseled my name, Kaytek, on the marble where he stood. Okay, November 2nd, 1946, she was sent to England, and you can see those are her original documents. And she's now convinced herself, brainwashed herself. She now changes her name from the Polish Stefcia to Stefania to be more British, and her alias Skolkowska, so she's completely brainwashed. Next slide. Then she's sent to Doddington Polish camp. For a while, she goes to school there. Then she gets a complete scholarship to the St. Mary's Roman Catholic Convent School in Lowestoft. She probably has the most secure time of her childhood here, because she's a Polish war hero. She's a devout Catholic, and she was very popular. Then her brother, Yakov, finds her through the Red Cross, and he comes to get her in England. And her sister, Miriam, who had married a Gentile Royal Air Force pilot who was Polish. Yakov comes from Israel, basically steals Edna away, and she wouldn't go with him because she's refused to believe that she was Jewish, and she wouldn't go with someone of the Hebrew persuasion and she didn't believe it, and she was very happy at the convent school. However, he sang her a lullaby, a Yiddish lullaby that she remembered from her mother, and so she went with him, as did Miriam. So they went to Israel, and she was searched for by the Interpol because he stole her. And they settled at the kibbutz Lohame Hagayot, and she married Harry Brill in Nahariya in 1953, 19 years old. They sailed to the United States in 1960 from Haifa to New York. And in 66, now her name, she decided to take her original name back, Edna, and she legally changes her name back. That's a picture of Sam. She had another son, Eli, and she changed her date of birth. They did that, you know. Anyway, here's a photo of her at Mila 18, that when we went in 89 to Warsaw. Next. And here is a photo of her by the Warsaw Ghetto Heroes Monument. Here's the Ghetto Fighters House, which is where her actual armband is, that we had just gotten a photo of her from the Polish Army. And here's a picture of Miriam, Edna, and Yaakov, who are three of the few Jews that survived the Warsaw Ghetto. Miriam, sadly, did not have children. She left her Gentile husband in London, and when she went to Israel, she remarried. She ended up committing suicide at the age of 45. Yaakov died of natural causes, and of course Edna died of natural causes this past June. Here's a picture of her 2 sons and husband and 5 grandchildren. So I wanted to just end by saying that, you know, yesterday a lot of people talked about the sheep to slaughter, that infamous saying, and all I can say is my mother-in-law, she was not a sheep that went to slaughter. She was a fighter. She was courageous. She fought the Nazis at 9 years old with a weapon, and she went on to portray the ultimate resistance to defy Hitler's final solution, because she has 3 grandchildren sitting right there. So she was the resistance. So thank you, Edna.